Imagine a shadowy network of economists jetting around the world, convincing poor nations to borrow billions they can never repay, all to hand over their oil, minerals, and sovereignty to Western corporations. This isn't a spy thriller, it's the real story of economic hitmen, exposed by whistleblower John Perkins in his explosive 2004 book. Stick around to uncover how this debt trap still shapes global power today. Hello, geopolitics enthusiasts! Welcome back to the channel, where we dive deep into the forces shaping our world. Today, we're exploring the chilling concept of the economic hitman, a term coined by John Perkins, a former insider who worked for US-backed consulting firms in the 1970s and 80s. Perkins confessed that these hitmen were deployed by superpowers like the United States to economically colonize developing countries through cunning financial schemes. His book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, reveals how international bodies like the World Bank and IMF were allegedly weaponized to create a modern form of empire building. So what exactly is an economic hitman? At its core, an economic hitman, or EHM, is a high-paid consultant who uses inflated economic forecasts to lure governments in the global south into massive loans for infrastructure projects. Think dams, power plants, and highways. These projects sound beneficial but are designed to overvalue benefits and ignore the crushing debt that follows. Here's the playbook. First, the EHM identifies a country with resources a corporation covets, like oil or strategic land. Then, they present the country's leader with a wildly optimistic projection, showing how $1 billion power plant or a new highway network will skyrocket their GDP. The catch? The loan for this project must come from institutions like the World Bank, and the construction contracts must go to Western corporations, often the very companies the EHM works for. It's a closed loop. The money never really goes to the developing country. It just gets transferred from a bank in Washington to a construction firm in Houston or London, leaving the developing country with the debt. A classic case Perkins points to is Ecuador in the 1970s. He claims his team predicted massive economic growth if Ecuador took on huge loans to develop its oil fields and infrastructure. The loans were taken, the infrastructure was built, and oil was extracted. But the wealth didn't trickle down. Instead, the country's debt ballooned. Poverty and inequality actually worsened. When Ecuador inevitably struggled to repay the loans, the lenders, backed by the US government, could demand their pound of flesh, control over their Amazonian oil reserves at a cheap price, support for US military bases, or votes in the UN. It's a textbook debt trap. But what happens if a country's leader refuses to play ball? This is where the story takes an even darker turn. Perkins calls this Step 2. If the EHMs fail to persuade a leader, the jackals are sent in. These are the assassins, the CIA-backed operatives who overthrow governments or orchestrate accidents. Perkins cites the examples of Panama's Omar Torrijos and Ecuador's Jaime Roldos. Both were charismatic nationalist leaders who resisted US corporate interests. Both died in mysterious plane crashes in 1981 after, according to Perkins, defying the EHMs. Their deaths served as a chilling warning to other leaders: accept the loans or face the consequences. If the jackals also fail, Step 3 is direct military intervention, as seen in places like Iraq. The goal is always the same: secure resources and enforce compliance, creating what Perkins calls a global empire, not of military occupation, but of economic domination. Now you might be thinking, this sounds like a conspiracy theory, and that's a fair point. Perkins' book has faced criticism. Some journalists and economists have questioned the details and argued that he exaggerates his own role and the intentionality of the system. They claim these outcomes are just the unfortunate byproducts of flawed global capitalism, not a coordinated conspiracy. However, whether you see it as a deliberate plot or a systemic failure, the results are undeniable. The debt burden on many developing nations is a real and devastating problem that perpetuates a cycle of poverty and dependency. We see echoes of this playbook today in modern economic relationships around the world, from massive infrastructure loans tied to resource extraction to trade deals that heavily favor multinational corporations. The story of the economic hitman is a powerful reminder to look beyond the headlines. When you hear about a massive development loan or a new international trade deal, ask the critical questions: who really benefits? Who is taking on the risk? And what are the hidden costs? Because, as John Perkins warns, the tools of empire have simply evolved for the 21st century.